Yeah, another anti-martial here.
Yeah, so instead of b4, I mentioned that black's other approach is to play bishop b7. And it's maybe a bit less popular these days at the top level to play bishop b7 than b4, but still a very, very serious move. I mean, the most natural move, I would say. You develop while solving the threat of takes on b5. The only problem is after d3, your bishop is a bit misplaced. So now black plays d6. White can play c3 or bishop d2 or knight c3 or any number of moves, but I'm suggesting knight d2 first. I think it's a bit more flexible than c3 immediately. So I wanted to show a few games. The first game I want to show is a famous one. It's Kasparov Short from the 1993 World Championship match. A match which Kasparov won, and this was an excellent game that he played. So Nigel played a move which is not the most popular move, but it's a very logical one. It's not a bad one at all. His move was knight d7. So black, in general, has to decide on a setup. And typical setups in the Spanish, one is to take some time to play knight b8 and knight d7. The other one is to play with a sort of Chigorin line, knight a5, drop the bishop back to a2, and then c5. Gaining space in the center, because basically black's knight on c6 is not great. It blocks the bishop, it blocks the c-pawn. Black would love to move the c-pawn and gain some space. So he has these two approaches of solving the problem with the knight, either putting on d7, which takes a lot of time, or with tempo putting on a5, where it's a bit misplaced compared to d7, but you do gain tempo on the bishop. Other approaches are to play h6, rook e8, and bishop f8. I mean, if rook e8 immediately, you kind of run into this knight g5 stuff, which is not a problem, but it will force you to go back rook f8.
Must draw situation.
Yeah, but white doesn't have to take the draw here.
Yeah.
And also, if, for example, I play the move knight f1, bishop f8, and now after knight g5, if you play rook e7, for example, you might run into knight e3 or knight f5 stuff. White can also first play c3, and it sort of forces black anyway to play h6. Or in this version, knight g5, rook f8. If I play c3, you're anyway going to play h6, knight f3, and probably rook e8 anyway. So black has this plan, you know. White can, of course, decide knight f1, rook e8, and then, for example, c3 or something. Bishop f8. It's a potential setup for black, but white has developed comfortably and now is ready to play d4. So black has a number of ways of playing. Knight d7 is one of the less common ones, but quite logical, because knight on c5, it attacks the bishop and this pawn on a4. So white has to deal with this idea, because you don't really want to give up the a file just yet, but you might have to. So Kasparov played c3. Nigel played knight c5. And the reason that Kasparov didn't play bishop c2 here is, I believe, because after knight a4, bishop a4, ba4, yeah, we ruined his structure. But black has a bishop pair, and after he plays f5, which is not possible right here immediately, because of queen b3 check. But if he plays, I don't know, a move like a5, and his queen side is not as weak as it seems, and the bishop pair is very important. And one day he will play king h8, f5, and he'll get counterplay with the bishop on the long diagonal. So that's the reason why Kasparov decided to take on b5. It's important to know that knight takes b3, bc6, knight a1, cb7. He wins an exchange, but temporarily. Next move is queen a4, trapping the knight. So Nigel recaptured, took on a8, took with the bishop. Taking with the queen doesn't change much. We anyway drop our bishop back to c2, and here we are ready to play d4.
Yeah.
So this shows the downside of the knight on c5. Yeah, it forced us to open the a-file trade rooks, which we didn't want to do. On the other hand, after d4, he will get kicked back to somewhere he doesn't want to go. That's why Nigel played bishop f6. It's directly aimed against white playing d4. But instead, Kasparov played b4, which is a typical idea to remember. That if white can get b4 and the bishop on b3, as Kasparov did. After knight e6, knight f1, bishop b7, knight e3, g6, bishop e3. He got this set up. The bishop is really nice here. It's really secure.
And I like white's pawns.
The white's pawns are nice, yeah. It's sort of like a symmetrical structure. It's a very similar structure. If black had pawn c6, it would be the same. But it's the piece placement, again, makes a difference. The knight on c6. And it's misplaced there. It would rather be on, for example, f6 to mirror white's structure, after which it would be equal. But on c6, it gets in the way of black's c-pawn. And it gets in the way of black's bishop. And it would really like to go somewhere else, but it has to take time to go there. So their idea is knight d5, and that's why Nigel drops his bishop back, ready after knight d5 to play knight d7, trading off his misplaced knight. And here Kasparov played not an obvious move, but a really strong one. He played h4. Now I would generally warn against playing this move. Sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's very weakening. Here it's good for one specific reason. Black's knight, which was on f6, went d7, c5, e6. On f6 it would cover h5. And it would cover g4. On e6 it does neither of those things, and so h4 doesn't create weaknesses which black can exploit. Like, for example, g4 is a weakness after h4. But white is the only one controlling that square. Black can't exploit it. The other thing is, black really doesn't want to play this move, allowing take and knight g5. And now g5 is a massively weak square, and black's structure is crippled. So black has to allow h5, and that's an annoying move, because you don't want to take that pawn. You weaken f5. So you have to leave it there, and then white has the option on each move. Take on g6, weakening g6, or play h6, creating a pawn which creates a lot of threats around black's king, right? So he played bishop c8. Bishop c8 is a sign that the bishop is not good on b7, and it happens a lot. Black plays bishop b7, but the bishop does nothing there, and ends up going back to c8. In this case, it doesn't really do much on c8 either because of the knight on e6. If the knight were on f6, black would be completely fine. White would have no way of playing h5. Black would cover this d5 square, but the knight on e6 is very problematic. h5 happened. Nigel played king h8, which is an understandable move, because basically this bishop on b3 is kind of bearing down on its diagonal, and he just didn't want to allow this anymore. The other thing is
f5. Is that?
Well,
it
f5
doesn't look okay.
Yeah, f5 is of course a move, but it looks especially dangerous here with the pin. That's probably the move that he was trying to
make work somehow.
Yeah.
But just
So let's see why here it might be a problem. The first thing that comes to mind is ef5. Actually, I'm not sure if I should include this or not, but actually let's include it. I'll take on g6. Take on f5, g5. So now you have a problem, right? You're pinned, and if you ever move your king, I'll have queen h5 stuff. And now the move I want to make work is d4. Because if ed4, yeah, I can maybe drop my knight back to c2, but this also looks very good. Rook f5, rook e6, things are falling apart for you. So after d4, you have to deal with this threat, but what do you do about it? If e4, I'm pretty sure I can still do this. E takes f3, d takes e6. And I think you're probably more likely than not going to lose this position. So tactics will probably not work out for you.
Yeah, I had a bad feeling anyway, but...
But you understand why he played king h8
yes,
because of that.
Definitely.
So here, actually, a very strong move, which Kasparov didn't play, was g3. And computer already gives a huge advantage for it. The point is, it's a typical idea. Now that the king is on h8, I'm very happy to get king g2, rook h1, the rook bearing down on the h file. And we'll see, for example, if f5, take king g2, or maybe I can include this as well.
Doesn't really improve things for black.
Yeah. After rook h1, you're going to be forced to go back into the pin, which is going to be very dangerous for you. So this was a very strong move. The move Kasparov made was also good, but not quite as killing as g3 would have been. And it's a bit surprising. After g3, black is borderline losing. In a few moves, I can imagine that black will come under a very strong attack. So knight d5. Now, unfortunately for black, f5 runs into h6, and then you're forced to put your bishop on f6. I don't think I want to take it yet, but I'm definitely happy to have this option in the future. But for the meantime, I might play d4 again. That's why Nigel played g5. He just wanted to stop h6. And now Kasparov showed the reason that this move is a weakness. That
Just
this move has
back,
downside is by going back.
Yeah.
He just came there, but he's happy to expend another tempo because of the square. Knight f4, Nigel tried to cover the square. Tactical problems as well. If knight e7, bishop f5, bishop e6, bishop e6, knight g5 winning a pawn. So knight f4, g3, excellent move. It looks like black won a pawn, but after knight f5, g5 is falling, and your knight on h5 is in a terrible place. It's completely cut off from the action. Took. Now, for example, if h6, knight g5 is crushing. Attacking f7, h5, and h5, queen h5 is winning. Nigel gave up his g-pawn, but there was no hope for him. And he quickly lost after h6, knight h4. Again, this knight on h5 gets targeted. Bishop knight f6, take, queen h5, king h7, but positionally, white is just slowly attacking. Knight g2, knight e3, knight g4, and Nigel was forced into a completely passive position and quickly resigned. So this is sort of a model game. It shows that knight d7 is a move with a clear purpose. You can't call it a bad move by any means, but the knight which ends up on e6 is actually misplaced.
Yeah, and also the black light squared bishop in a way. I mean, this is what they do. It took back on a8, b7, c8 just to get back to the right diagonal.
That's a good point. Black played bishop c8, b7, took on a8, and then the bishop was so poorly placed here that it had to go back and then back to c8. So you spent 4 moves just to put your bishop back on its original square. That is one of the reasons why knight d7 lost popularity. The main move by far for black is to play knight a5. You gain a tempo. You don't want to give a bishop pair, so we play bishop a2. And black plays c5. Now he's gained space. The downside for him is that he does weaken his position, right? c5 does weaken the d5 square. This isn't a weakness which is immediately exploitable, but you can imagine after white plays knight f1, white will play bishop g5, and after eliminating this knight, white can play knight d3, bishop d5 or knight d5, and gain control over this outpost. So here black has to come up with a plan. And one of the main moves here is actually bishop c8. Which again shows you took 2 moves just to put your bishop back. I mean, this is, I think, the clearest demonstration that bishop b7, a natural move, but one with downsides. So there's a game, Leko against Ivanchuk, which I thought was quite impressive how Leko exploited his advantage. He played c3, which is just a useful move, one day preparing d4. For example, if bishop e6, we might be happy to take. We can even open the a file, because this opening is probably more to our benefit than to his. And then d4. And if we trade all the pawns off in the center, we take back with the knight, attack this pawn. He's left with a lot of weaknesses. So Ivanchuk played bishop d7. Okay. Again, he's spending more time with his bishop, trying to find a good square for it. Knight e3 was a move. Now, in general, black can take on a4. But this move is not without its minuses. Because now you're left with more weaknesses. And the pawn, I can't win it back immediately, but one day I will win it back. And here I can consider a few things. One idea is knight c4. I take back with the bishop, and now I have an outpost for my bishop. But another very interesting idea is to play knight d2. And I think this is a move which shows the downside of ba4, right? As soon as you weaken this square, I start to take advantage of it. And one of my ideas is to play bishop b1, bishop c2, and bishop a4. I had to cover the b3 square first, but now I'm threatening this. And, of course, I'm taking a huge amount of time to win back the pawn. But after I win it, you're going to be left with a huge amount of weaknesses.
Black doesn't have counterplay.
Yeah, if
Well,
I
quick
if I make
counterplay, yeah.
no, black doesn't have any immediate counterplay. You can make a few more moves like bishop b1 and something if black plays a bit nonchalantly, bishop c2. I'll take a a4 next move, and your knight will start to get kicked back as well, and you'll be left with a ruined pawn structure. So after knight e3, Ivanchuk played a natural move, queen c7, connecting the rooks. And I like the way that Leko played, and it's also, we'll notice, he played the same idea that Kasparov had. He took, and b4. And his idea was that if black takes, and knight c6, for example, bishop d2, we have now an exactly symmetrical structure, but white's pieces are still better placed. Basically, my knight, rather than being on c3, where it would get in the way of defense of this pawn, is on e3.
Controlling
on e3,
two squares.
It controls two squares rather than just one. It can jump to f5 or to d5. But the most important thing is look at your bishop on e7, and its counterpart is on a2. If my bishop was on e2, I couldn't claim that white has any advantage. But the bishop on a2 is so much better than the bishop on e7. It bears down on this pawn on f7, putting pressure on black's position, and is just generally very active, and as well controls d5. And here white is maybe not significantly better, but certainly much more comfortable. Ivanchuk decided not to give up the c-file. He didn't want to open the c-file. He played knight b7 instead. After bishop d2, he was left with the question of what to do with this knight.
Yeah.
There's another slight problem. It looks like black has the a-file, right? Because our bishop is on a2 blocking it. But if you try to ever get the a-file with rook a6, rook a7, that bishop takes it. f7 with discovered check and winning a rook. If you play rook a4, I play bishop b3, rook a1, queen a1, and now white has the a-file. And if I'm allowed to play queen a7 or queen a6, I'll have a lot of pressure on the queen side as well. Ivanchuk decided to play knight d8, which is kind of a funny move. It's a bit sneaky. If I play bishop f7, you don't actually win a rook because knight f7 defends the rook. But Leko played bishop b3, and he took control of the a-file. Now it's clear that the knight is now on a5. You can see again its maneuver. b8 to c6, a5, b7, d8. To take 4 moves to go from b8 to d8 is not a good sign. And it still has nowhere good to go. Rook e8 happened. Take. Now, understandably, I think Ivanchuk didn't want to allow a position like this. Knight d5. And I can definitely consider e d5 because that kills your knight.
I was just asking bishop or pawn. And
this is a big question. But in this version, pawn might be... The only problem is it really kills our bishop. This is the only downside. On the other hand, your knight on d8 is kind of shut out of the game. But bishop d5 also looks very interesting because it is a clear outpost on d5. And if black is to move his knight somewhere, white can even consider c4 attacking his pawn. Depends, of course, on black's move. But just to make one more move, knight c6. If I play queen a2, you have a serious problem with this pawn, and you have to defend it with like rook f8. And now, I have a few options. First of all, I can just get the a-file and try to invade with my rook on a6 eventually. Or I could also try to bother you with a move like bishop g5. My point is if you take, I take back, and I attack f7. Similarly, knight g5 might be an option. Knight g5 is more likely going to force you to take, and now I have the bishop pair. So white has many attractive options here. Instead, he took with the queen. Queen a2 happened. In this case, not attacking the pawn, but putting some extra pressure on it. h6, stopping knight g5, h3. Finally, he put his knight on the square. But I want to point out that although it looks like an active square, then I can't move anywhere because of the attack on f7. Knight d5, bishop d5. Black still has to deal with this very unpleasant pressure on f7. And if his bishop was on b6 like ours on d5, he would have some counterplay. But the bishop is passively placed on e7. Queen c8. d4 happened. He played queen c8 to get out of the threat of d4. Bishop f6, queen b3. And here white had very significant pressure. His next move might be queen b4 attacking d6, or it might be rook a1 with idea of rook a8. Black, of course, cannot take this pawn. It's important to mention, because f7 is hanging. Bishop c6, queen b4. And now the pressure was very serious. Take, take. He tried to make tactics work for him. He tried to simplify the position, but he ended up losing d6, and with it, the game. The d-pawn was kind of too dangerous. White is playing knight e5, queen c6, pushing the d-pawn, and eventually Ivanchuk lost. And this was a very important game. It was from the Linares tournament at the time. No longer is ongoing, but at the time it was one of the strongest tournaments in the world. So after knight f1, very often black plays b4. This is actually the main move.
Yeah.
And the reason for b4 is, as we saw in the game, if white ever plays a b5, and it's kind of at white's discretion to take, right? Black can't open the a file, but white can. Black can potentially experience a lot of problems down the a file, especially with tactics involving bishop takes f7, and sometimes rook on a8 is hanging. So black very often decides to just shut out all these possibilities by playing b4.
But, okay, light squared.
That's true, yeah.
Weaknesses, yeah.
On the other hand,
yeah,
you do end up with another weakness on c4, and white might take advantage of this by playing knight e3, then knight d2. We saw this idea somewhere else. Knight c4, removing this defender of c4 and starting to get a grip on those squares. So knight e3 is a fine move. I mean, this was played by a number of good players. I also played this once. After knight e3, normally black plays bishop c8 to get bishop e6, and there are lines, for example, knight d2, rook b8, knight c4. The trade of knights is usually good for white, because you kind of start to get a grip on these squares. And there's this Dvoretsky rule, or I'm not sure if it's Dvoretsky who first came up with it, this superfluous knight.
Yeah.
So basically, white's knights are both trying to occupy the same squares. If you eliminate one of those knights, it helps white. So black very often plays knight c6 to, white would love to occupy the square with both knights.
Yeah.
But it's not quite possible. This is usually the reaction for that reason, that black, rather than trading knights, plays knight c6, leaves white a bit congested. And, white usually tries to follow with bishop d2, c3 with a complicated fight.
Sometimes a5, is that an idea?
Yeah,
for white?
this was one of the games, Milish against Mickey Adams. Bishop d2, bishop e6, a5 was played, gaining space, rook b5, bishop b3. But black took this pawn, which is, of course, the downside. And then white got a certain degree of compensation, because a6 is such a serious weakness, and so is e6. But it wasn't enough for an advantage, and they eventually drew. So, that's the reason why, both after b4 and after bishop c8, I'm recommending the move c3. Here we saw c3 immediately, to avoid knight e3, b4. And also after b4, I'm recommending c3. And the thing is that after bishop c8, rather than play knight e3 or something, I'll take, and I'll start to attack this pawn, which is a bit of a weakness. And I'll follow it up with knight e3 and knight c4, but this pawn remains weak. If you protect it with knight c6, you run into rook c1 stuff, or just knight e3, knight d5. Of course, black can play this, but he ends up with a slight disadvantage.
Yeah, and rook b8, is that an idea? After bishop d2, rook b8, maybe trying with ideas like b3, I don't know whether probably never works.
This is a move, and then I'll play knight e3.
Yeah.
And the thing with b3 is that I'll take the pawn. And yeah, you can probably regain the pawn eventually, but you'll end up with a lot of light square weaknesses. The fact that we lost our dark square bishop is not too relevant here. So that's why after c3, more often than not, black takes, just to avoid cb4 and bishop d2. There's also another line. Rook c8, rook b8, take. Actually, it's a direct transposition. Bishop d2, have knight c6, knight e3, and then bishop c8. Yeah, there's knight e3, as I mentioned, or rook c1. And the point of rook c1 is, after b3, white is actually ready to play bishop e1 now. And the rook, rather than being on a1, is on an active square. And now, next move, d4. Bishop d7, d4, and we don't care about this pawn. Take, take. Black can greedily take it, but our initiative after knight f5 is tremendous. So after c3, black usually prefers to take. Take and play a position without the weak b pawn. On the other hand, white does have the b file now. And for example, if black is to play, I included a game Maxime Vachier-Lagrave played against Stefanova, and she decided to take the b file, rook b8, knight e3, bishop c8. Again, we see in almost every line black at some point plays bishop c8 to play bishop e6. But now he was in time for d4, and he quickly got an advantage. Queen c7.
Once more, knight takes e4. Always check this. Why doesn't it work here?
Knight d5. Yeah, no, it's of course important.
It's funny.
After knight e4, the point is knight
e4.
d5.
Yeah.
And here I really need to defend this pawn.
Yeah.
I attack your knight, and if you go back somewhere, for example here, I can take, take. So I didn't end up material, but after d5, knight e5, I have the bishop pair in an open position, and I have threats of knight takes f7. So yeah, always be on the lookout for tactics. But it's really due to black's last move. After knight e3, we were threatening knight f5, and to prevent that, and also to put his bishop to put her bishop on e6, she played bishop c8. But now, because there's no pressure on d4, we're ready for d4 ourselves. She played queen c7 to defend e5. This is still no longer a threat because of knight d5, but Maxime decided to act quickly anyway. He took, and knight c4. And we have, again, an almost symmetrical pawn structure. The only difference is our pawn is on c3, black's pawn is on c5. With the pawn on c5, you have a weakness on d5. And with knight c4, he wanted to trade knights, and that's exactly what happened. Knight d7 to defend e5, knight d2, knight c4. If, for example, black tries to keep the knights here, knight e3 will happen, and knight d5, knight c4, everything's coming. All of those squares will be occupied by white's knights. Knight c4, knight b6. Rather than trade a pair of knights, he decided to keep the knights on. The threat is a5 and knight d5. She decided to stop it, but after rook b1, she was left with a lot of weaknesses. First of all, tactical problems again. Bishop d7, attacking these pawn runs into rook takes b6. Queen b6, queen d7, or rook b6, knight d5, attacking these pieces. Queen d8, knight b6, queen d7, winning a piece. So, as usual, all this positional play is backed up by tactics. So whenever you see like a very smooth positional game, it doesn't seem like it, but the player who conducted this positional game had to calculate a lot, had to make sure that everything works out tactically.
Yeah, but this constellation is a huge advantage for white. C3 versus c5.
Again, it depends on
the pieces.
It depends on the pieces. Yeah. For example, if black were to be able to play two moves here, c4 and bishop e6, she would just be better, yeah, because the bishop on a2 would be cut out, and that's what she tried to get with c4. This pawn is, I mean, all other things being equal, black would have a better structure now, but usually it's difficult for black to achieve this because of the weakness of his pawns, and that's what happened here. Everything is great except for the tactics, and black's problem is after knight c4, white doesn't take on b8 because here knight e3, but white has a far better move, which is knight d5, and this is just completely crushing. It wins. It doesn't just win the piece back, because where can you put your queen? You have to protect this rook. But if queen d6, I play knight e7, check. I remove your queen, and then I pick up your rook. If queen a7, I remove your bishop, you move your king, and I pick up your rook. So the bishop was poisoned, But after bishop b7, bishop d5, take, white was just a pawn up. Again, queen c3 would allow just too much of an initiative with bishop b2 and taking on e5. But in the game, yeah, he was just a pawn up, and I guess at this point, probably his moves could have been maybe improved slightly. He did win in the end, but in any case, white has many ways to prove the advantage here. So we see how things work out for white, where you get control of the c4 and d5 squares, and you start to take advantage of them. If black just makes a few natural moves. Sometimes in this position, black tries to play c4, which is a very logical move, because basically you're breaking up white's pawn structure. You can't take on c4 because of this stuff. e4 is hanging. And otherwise, the trade of c and d pawns should be good for black, right? Because c3 becomes a bit of a weakness. On the other hand, after I play knight g3, now I'm threatening to win a pawn. You take, and I take back. So you took 2 tempi, and you helped me develop my pieces even more so. And yeah, I have weaknesses now, but so do you. And your weaknesses are d6, and I'm going to start attacking that with bishop a3 and knight f5, and the d5 square. And the other problem for you is your knight on a5. It's not a bad piece. At least it's sort of outposted on a5, and it can't get attacked directly. But after bishop a3, I not only put bishop pressure on d6, I'll start to put pressure on the knight maybe with bishop d4. And so there was a game, Sweedler-Evenchuk, quite an important game, theoretically, even today. And it was played, 13 years ago, so it's not the most recent game. But still, they both played quite well in this game.
Again, bishop c8. Okay, that's sad. Is it d5? Just to open the game. I will lose a pawn on e5 somehow.
Yeah, no, this
somehow.
is the problem. After
this
e5,
is I don't know. So say
for example, knight d5, knight e5. You're down a pawn for nothing.
Yeah, and also after bishop takes, I just want to.
Yeah, after bishop takes, I think I have a variety of ways of doing it.
Yeah.
I can take on d5 first.
Yeah.
Or, to be honest, this also looks very good. Take on a2, queen d3, knight d3, a clean pawn in the endgame.
Yeah.
No
Okay.
compensation. If you play a move like rook c8, something, putting the rook on the open c file, I hit you with knight f5, e7's hanging next bishop a3, with very dangerous threats. And I would say that if black makes even slight inaccuracies here, he can quickly be losing. Also important that after rook e8, I have the knight g5 ideas. Maybe not here directly, maybe here I can still play bishop a3 first, but knight g5 is always a move to watch out for. So after queen d3 to stop knight f5, it was really crucial. He played bishop c8. Sweedler played bishop a3, putting pressure on d6 in one day, maybe bishop e4. So white's threat is just directly rook ed1, bishop takes d6, and that's why Evenchuk decided after rook ed1 to play knight b7. Rook d8, knight g5. I just mentioned this idea. f7 is, at the moment, the only way to defend it is by going back rook f8, which loses pawn. And after knight b7, he played queen c4, which is a move which could be questioned. I think there are other attractive moves. One of the interesting moves is knight h4. Because I can't play knight f5 right now. Take e4. But if I play knight h4, suddenly I'm threatening this. And you can play g6, but g6 has its own problems. For example, you could imagine that someday, if I get a queen to h6 and knight to g5, I'll start to attack you. And here I can even just go back. And yeah, I spent 2 tempi to provoke g6, but it's not necessarily a bad move. The way he played was interesting. He noticed that black was trying to play knight c5, and so what he wanted to do was, after queen c4, he trades queens, and he prevents knight c5. Take, knight e5. And here in the ending, white is has a rather more pleasant position. My threat is knight e5 here, because the bishop on e7 is hanging if you take. So we played rook e8 to defend the bishop, and then rook b1 came, and rook b6. Putting pressure on a6, on d6, And yeah, black was in a rather unpleasant position. He's had to start defending with rook a7, rook b6, knight a5, and eventually he held the game, but it was a struggle. White was much better, and okay, it's not always possible to win better positions, but in any case, black is the one risking here.
Yeah. Yeah, well, White's structure is worse here, but his piece play is much better. Could one say that? I mean, just going back here, yeah.
I would say that the structure is relative, right? Because
Yeah,
I mean, both
well,
sides have
obviously.
weaknesses. Both
Yeah.
sides have
Yeah.
isolated A pawns. Black has a backward pawn. White has an isolated C pawn. Black has a weakness on D5. It's all very relative. The only to say that the structure is better is really asking yourself which of these pawns can be attacked. And in this case, white is the one attacking black's pawns, right? I'm attacking d6, I'm attacking e5. Because white has the more active pieces, white is the one who's attacking black's weaknesses rather than the other way around. If, for example, black had like knight on c5, bishop on e6, rook on c8, rook on d8, then yeah, black would start to attack white's pawns, but he never quite gets it. And also in the endgame, it looks like, yeah, white's pawns are the weak ones, but how do you attack it? If you play bishop d7 attacking this, I have knight e5. And you're the one who ends up losing pawns rather than me. By the way, bishop a4. I think that we can continue with initiative, like rook b1, and then knight f5 next move. So it seems like white is always the one with initiative. Knight a5, knight f5, I continue attacking you. You're the one with all the hanging pieces. So yeah, it depends. It's a very concrete position.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, what remains here? I mean, of course, it was very convincing, everything, but after bishop b7, usually black plays, sooner or later at some stage, he will play bishop c8. So is this recommendable at all? I mean, you said it's a main line, of course, but it doesn't feel right then. Having seen all these games, the bishop doesn't belong to b7, or is that too general again?
Yeah,
Difficult
I don't
question.
think bishop b7 is a bad move.
Yeah.
I think it's a different type of position. b4 is a more direct attempt to equalize, and these days at the top, players like the more direct attempts, right? Here it feels like it's a bit too much of a game, where white has too many options, and that's why players at the top, generally have moved away from this move to b4, the move we saw before. But it's not a bad move. I mean, yeah, black will take a tempo in a position like this. He'll spend 2 tempi, but on the other hand, he didn't have to weaken the structure. So it's more of I wouldn't say a principled approach, but more of an idealistic approach, right? Here, you're trying to keep all the advantages of black's position, and the advantages are, in this case, space. Black, after playing c5, has a great deal of space, and it's kind of rare in modern chess for the black player to have so much space, so much freedom for his pieces. On the other hand, yeah, you are wasting a lot of time to try to keep your structure intact, to try to keep c4 defended. The other thing is that in this b4 line, after a4, in the b4 line, you have to account for the opening of the center and the d file here. While after bishop b7, white doesn't get such an opportunity. White has to play more slowly, d3. So you could argue that because of the slower nature of the position, tempi count for a little bit less. And black can afford to waste a bit more time without sabotaging his own position.
Okay.
Yeah.